Welcome to Alternative Dog Moms Podcast. I'm Kimberly Gauthier, the creator of Keep the Tail Wagging. For the past 9 years, I've been blogging about raw feeding, pet wellness, and life as a crazy dog mom. I've seen massive improvements in my dog's health since I started raising my dogs naturally, and I'm passionate about sharing my experience to help other pet parents.
I'm Erin Scott. For the past 9 years, I've been researching and learning everything I can about healing cancer, allergies, autoimmune, and mystery illnesses in both my dogs and myself, and I can't wait to share with you everything I've learned on this journey. As the Alternative Dog Moms, we're bringing you all the latest dog health news that we're following and sharing the tips, tricks, and resources we learn along the way. Now, let's get started. Hello, Kimberly.
Hello, Erin.
So we have a very special guest today. I think this is the farthest distance, right, that we've spoken to someone.
Yeah, I guess the other one was Ireland.
Yeah. So Lee Carroll, welcome. Thank you for being here.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
So we're so excited to get to talk to you. And I learned that you have a very interesting and personal story of how you got into being an herbalist and working with the type of medicine that you do. Would you mind sharing your origin story with us?
I'm sure. I'll take a little bit of time there. It's a fascinating journey, the way that we kind of discover our kind of passion and joys in life. And I studied botany when I was younger, and I was very interested in plants and medicine. And I knew and was friendly with a person called Kerry Bone, and we shared very similar interests. And I was actually running a bakery. I worked in the bakery industry. I had a franchise, and I was really unwell. And many people have got a similar story. So I was early onset diabetes. I failed a glucose tolerance test, and I was looking to do some changes in my life. And the bakery that I was running was doing well, and I decided to go and study social work. And after a year of that, I thought, holy hell, I don't want to be a social worker. I was, very kind of expansive in my thinking. And anyway, so Kerry Bone, this friend of mine, set up a company called MediHerb. And around the same time that I decided to stop studying social work, he rang up one day and said, Lee, I've known you for 10 years. You're the man for the job. I want you to be my production manager. And MediHerb was just a very small and fledgling company at the time. And wind the clock forward 35 years, and it's the dominant practitioner brand in Australia. It's got global reach. Kerry's famous as a medical herbalist, written 7 textbooks. And so I had this long history with MediHerb that spanned 30 years, and I decided it was time to move on. And I got a chance to develop some unique mushroom products for a small company in Northern California, and that's where I met Namex. And Joni Camlet is a friend and colleague, and she was on board with that kind of journey as well. And that kind of spawned my interest in medicinal mushrooms, because my history with MediHerb, we didn't really touch on mushrooms much. So I did a really deep dive, and I've got an online course and kind of positioned myself not just as a herbalist, but, as a bit of an expert in the whole area of how you understand quality and manufacturing, and how you apply mushrooms as a therapy in combination with herbs in a clinical setting.
I grew up in such a standard American diet, standard American medicine kind of way. And it wasn't until I started experiencing my own health issues that I sort of opened my eyes to other types of, more alternative holistic modalities. And so my neighbor recently I'm one of those people that gets eaten alive by mosquitoes. And she made me this ointment that is made from plantain out of our yards. And to me, it's still kind of mind-blowing that this thing that looks kind of like a weed or something has medicinal properties to it that works better than anything you get at the drugstore, at least for me so far.
Yeah.
So, can you share with us what it is about plants that makes them have these medicinal properties that we're unaware of unless we are somebody who grew up with that kind of knowledge?
Yeah, it's a good question, Erin. I think all of life is interconnected. I've always believed that, but I had that experience a few years ago. I started doing some psychedelic therapy with a practitioner in Northern California using psilocybin mushrooms, and over the course of 4 or 5 guided journeys, I got a really much more palpable and deep understanding of just how this connection is. And the biology of life is the same. So we all share the same chemistry, and plants need to do their thing. And to do their thing, they need to survive and prosper. They need to be able to interact with their environment to have seeds that will grow, and then new plants will grow up. And the chemistry of the plant, some of it is designed for the plant to survive. So if it's a tree, it needs the woody component so it can stand tall. But it also needs the non-essential chemistry elements, which might protect the bark, from insects attacking it, or it might protect the fruit from the ultraviolet rays of the sun, or it might prevent, animals from eating the seeds. So the seeds might have a toxic coating on them, so the animals won't eat all of the seeds. They might only get halfway through and they'll feel sick, and then they'll go and, oh, that wasn't such a good idea. They'll move on to something else. So the chemistry of plants has got, and you can think of it as a happy accident. You could think of it as an evolutionary design. You could think of it as just, the interconnectedness of nature. But there are certain intersection points where the chemistry of plants intersects with the chemistry of the animals in beneficial ways. And the essence of a good human diet is to provide not only the building blocks and the materials that allow us to function. So we need protein to drive all of those aspects of our biology. We need sources of energy, glucose, etc. But we also need these non-nutritional phytochemicals, and from the fungal realm, it's mycochemicals. Our body's evolutionarily designed to need that stuff, and we need it based on our kind of genetic heritage, where we come from in the world, the sorts of influences that we kind of evolved consuming. We need those influences on a regular basis to maintain our health. And if we get sick, we can select them appropriately to actually help resolve a condition. So the essence of a good diet is that you're eating foods which are in part food and in part medicine. So, turmeric is a good example. It's a spice which has, very, very significant health properties. So if you have a diet where you eat a lot of turmeric, you get the benefits. And particularly if you cook it with black pepper and coconut milk and fenugreek and other things, you can help enhance the bioavailability of it. But no one's sitting down to eat a bowl full of turmeric powder. It was only ever used as a spice. So if you increase the dose and you convert that powder into an extract that's bioavailable, and fenugreek does that the best, then you can take that pill, and then the chemistry of the curcumin and all of its associated molecules have a natural interaction with the chemistry of our body to help nudge it into, the direction of sort of more optimal health. And there's lots of kind of discussion around the individual pathways and all that sort of stuff. But at the heart of it, we're all connected. The chemistry of plants and mushrooms has a natural interaction with humans, and the art of using that knowledge to help animals and humans has been suppressed because there's a lot of money in selling drugs, and there's not a lot of money in teaching people how to look after themselves. So, this idea that there's a drug for everything is very new. Humans have survived really well, for millions of years, without the need for those things. And it was only once we became industrialized and lived in big cities that, you know, we think about all of the Black Plague and all of that awful stuff, but, you know, civilizations prospered quite well, looking after themselves through the cautious and the judicious use of nature. It's a fascinating area.
Yeah. One thing I find interesting is, you know, with the pet industry being as profitable as it is, once people caught on that there's a segment of the pet industry that's interested in natural things, they started coming up with products. And next week, we're headed to Super Zoo. So we're going to see booth after booth of so-called natural supplements. So how does the average pet parents, how are they able to discern between a quality herbal or mushroom product and one that is just basically all for show?
That's a good question, Kimberly, and I don't have a great answer for you, unfortunately. It's a real challenge, and sometimes it's impossible for, you know, the pet parent to be able to understand whether it's valuable or not. So just pick a herb, you know, or a mushroom that might be in there, and I can just tell you about what the quality aspects of it might be.
One thing that I've noticed is, like, I never really thought of, I'm trying to think of the mushrooms that are in this one new product. And actually it is a really good product. But what I found that was interesting about it was that they didn't use, it's the, you know, the mushroom from Green Juju. You know, they didn't use the traditional mushrooms that we're used to seeing. So we're used to seeing the reishi, the shiitake, the
Right.
shock, you know, they didn't use those. And one of the comments that I saw on social media, simply because people don't really understand mushrooms, was they didn't understand why they use those mushrooms, because it's sort of like, these are mushrooms I get at my local grocery store, so they can't possibly be beneficial. But one of them was cremini. And so what are the benefits of that one?
Right. Okay. And as a practitioner, and, you know, most of all of my adult life has been, you know, promoting practitioner-based products and guiding practitioners on how to use them, and then understanding that it's just really hard educating the public. So I'm now in this position of, you know, like trying to help the public understand, you know, the way to navigate through that. But it becomes quite technical, so it's often hard to get the message across. So there's a great place for, you know, for people like yourselves in the pet coaching space, and the holistic veterinarians to promulgate this kind of message. But before I get to the criminy, you know, if you see echinacea on a label, everybody knows that echinacea is good for the immune system, but you can have echinacea leaf, root, you can have the seeds, you can have whole plant, you can have fresh plant. There's just this blithering array of choice, and it's just really complicated to explain that stuff. And the active constituents of that plant are really hard to retain in the finished product in any kind of meaningful way. So it's likely that any echinacea in a pet product is likely to be inferior. And, you know, you could just put a line through that on the label and say, well, it says it's on there, but I'm just going to pretend it's not, you know, because it's not likely to get any benefit. With mushrooms, I think it's possibly a little bit easier. And at the macro level, the tradition around using mushrooms comes from what I would call the fruiting body, which is kind of a scientific regulator term, which describes the part of a mushroom that produces the spores that do the propagation. And mushrooms have got this really weird terminology that describes them, and it's a pretty arcane thing. So the term sporocarp, for example, is a generic term that describes all of the structures that produce spores, but no one's going to, you know, warm to that idea. Oh, have a dose of your sporocarp. It'd be like, nah, bad idea. And then fruiting body is a little bit odd as well, because it's not a fruit, and it's not technically a body. So we use the word mushroom to describe it. But these organisms are fungal organisms. So anything coming from that fungal realm, it's it's a fungal fruiting body, or it's fungal mycelium, it's fungal spores. So when we think about a mushroom, there's lots of products out there that don't actually contain the mushroom, and it's the mushroom which has got all of the traditional knowledge. The humans have been using mushrooms as foods and medicine for 48,000 years. The earliest use of penicillin, for example, is 48,000 years ago, where humans were using moldy herbaceous material on tooth abscesses in caves in Spain, and they were eating Schizophyllum commune and the shaggy inkcap and a couple of other mushrooms. So, our history with these things is really long. And mushrooms have got a particular type of chemistry which interacts with the body in that way that I was describing earlier. So there's beta-glucans, there's non-starch alpha-glucans that are prebiotic that play a role immunologically. There's ergothioneine, which is a really important antioxidant that dogs need. There's secondary metabolites in all of these mushrooms. So a lot of the products that are being sold on the market are actually fermented grains or mycelium substrates that don't actually represent the mushroom. And I don't necessarily have a problem with those, because there is some evidence that suggests that there might be some benefits. But when mushrooms work, it's because of the chemistry. It's not some magic trick. It's not some, like homeopathic thing where you can transfer some energy. So if you're wanting to look at it in a calculated way, you've got to look in there and see, are there beta-glucans? Is there ergothioneine? Is there the secondary metabolites? And so if you see on the label that a mushroom mycelium or myceliated grain, you haven't got the authentic mushroom product. So crimini, coming to that question now, crimini is just a fancy name for Agaricus bisporus, which is the common button mushroom. So the white button mushroom, the portobello, and the crimini, they're all the same species. But if you put crimini on the label, it sounds cool and exotic, but it's just the humble old button mushroom. And the thing with retail and the thing with consumer trends is that they're very susceptible to fads and marketing campaigns. So companies need to create novelty and newness. So there's new things coming out all the time to attract people's attention so they can get the sales. And so that's part of the drive behind, constantly reinventing things. So people now think that the white button mushroom and shiitake are just kind of edible mushrooms and that they don't deliver much medicine, which is far from the truth. So it's very hard to even get a shiitake extract product, for human consumption, because people don't want to buy it, because lion's mane's better and reishi's better and turkey tail's better. So the white button mushroom has got soluble beta-glucans that have anti-inflammatory effects in the large intestine. So animals with inflammatory, gut health, the white button mushroom will be very helpful. And it's a very significant prebiotic fiber, so it helps to control that aspect. And it's got, moderate doses of ergothioneine, which help to drive. And I would consider it an essential nutrient for a dog, as it is for any animal, to help with oxidative stress, for example.
Yeah. So with the ergothioneine, are the oyster mushrooms a richer source of that?
Oyster mushrooms is a big category. So you've got your regular like white oyster mushrooms, and then there's the salmon colored ones and the pink ones. And there's grey ones. The golden oyster, there's also king oysters that look a bit like a big thick, they've got a big thick trunk. The golden oyster has got the highest levels, and different varieties of the golden oyster mushroom can have up to 10 milligrams per gram of dry weight, which makes it, a veritable kind of factory for ergothioneine. The bolete mushroom, the porcini, that is kind of like the signature mushroom of Italy and very popular in Europe. And early humans were avid consumers of that mushroom, and it grows wild in the US. It kind of ranks second to the golden oyster. and it's around 7 or 8. But there's kind of variations. And golden oyster is available as a supplement, and real mushrooms have a product called Ergo Gold, which has got guaranteed minimum of 5 milligrams of ergothioneine per capsule, and there's sometimes a bit more than that.
Can you go into the benefits of ergothioneine?
Sure. Well, like following that theme that Erin introduced, with the question of the why plants and why mushrooms, what is it about them? The evolutionary history of fungi and animals, including us, goes back about 1,000 million years. So about 1,000 million years ago, give or take 100, there was a single common ancestor. And from that single common ancestor, we had the kingdom fungi and we had the kingdom animalia. And they then produced all of the different organisms within those kingdoms. So as a result of that shared ancestor, we've got some shared biology. And the shared biology kind of works out to be about 30% of the DNA in a fungi is shared by an animal or a human. And the intracellular mechanisms that exist within fungi and humans, there's some significant similarity. And fungi are not like a plant. They're much more like us. So they need to breathe oxygen. They expire carbon dioxide. They need to drink water. They need to digest their food. They do it on the outside. We do it on the outside as well, but the stomach just sits inside the body, but technically it's outside because you can reach down in there and kind of access it. So the similarities, without going into all the details, animals and humans have got cholesterol, which is a really important molecule that every cell needs to be healthy. Mushrooms have got ergosterol, which is almost chemically identical. Unless you're a chemist, you couldn't kind of tell them apart. And then the way that cells control stress and therefore inflammation and maintain health is through an elaborate arrangement of antioxidant mechanisms and antioxidant team players. And the antioxidant defenses in a fungus or in a mushroom are very, very similar to the defenses in an animal or a human cell. And glutathione is the main water-soluble antioxidant in animals and humans. And in fungi, it's the secondary antioxidant. In fungi, ergothioneine is one of the primary antioxidants. And in humans, ergothioneine is the backup antioxidant. So this is a little bit challenging to explain to a non-scientific audience. But if you could just imagine a cell. So imagine a balloon that's full of water, and that's the cell. So everything inside the cell sits in that water. You've got a nucleus with all your DNA. You've got all of these organelles and intracellular structures, and each cell is designed to do its own particular thing, and it's beavering away doing that. And respiration creates stress. If you exercise, it can create stress. If you encounter damage or infection, it can cause stress. If you interact with excessive minerals, it can cause stress. So there's these mechanisms to control that stress. And in the cell, glutathione is the main one. So if any reactive oxygen species get produced, free radicals, the glutathione deals with that. But glutathione can be very easily depleted. So if there's a lot of stress, so, say your dog just found, the chocolate bar in your backpack, and it was bonanza because it wasn't just one, it was two, and they got woofed down. So that poor dog's now dealing with all of the, how do I deal with these chemicals that I'm not designed to, to dispose of? How do I deal with all the fat? How do I deal with all of the glucose and the fructose? So that creates the stress, and that can deplete the glutathione. And then the cells that are engaged in that, say in the liver, all of a sudden they're not defended against any stress anymore. So it creates damage. And then that can then create inflammation. It can kill off cells. You can get necrosis. It can be the kind of early entry point into disease processes. So ergothioneine sits in the background, and when the cell becomes stressed, it's got this chemical curiosity that when the cell's stressed, the pH changes a little bit, and ergothioneine in that pH change, it gets flicked into its active molecule, and it starts defending the cell while the glutathione can regenerate. So the cell's never without any antioxidant protection. It does a lot of other things as well. Ergothioneine has non-antioxidant roles as well. It's an important player in mitochondrial respiration, so it makes skeletal muscle more functional, and it controls a whole lot of cellular processes like vasoconstriction and dilation and a whole bunch of other stuff. But so that's kind of like a snapshot. If you're seeking clarification on any of that kind of sciencey, nerdy stuff I just riffed on, you could ask me.
So with the several ways, well, I don't want to get there yet. One of the things that, one of the criticisms I've heard of like real mushrooms in particular is how the mushrooms are sourced. People will, it's always interesting to me because people are like, oh my gosh, well, no, it's in China. And of course, if it's in China, it must be bad. So I'm not going to take it. Whereas on the flip side, the same people will follow traditional Chinese medicine and acknowledge that has been around for thousands of years. So it would make sense that if we're going to look to a culture that really understands how to produce mushrooms, that's a good place to start. So can you talk more about how the mushrooms are sourced?
Like, I guess there's like a connotation that anything in China equals toxic waste dump or something,
Yeah, it's a good question. And I think there's a number of factors that play into this fear. And, some of them are valid and some of them aren't. I think unscrupulous companies, kind of promote this angle to create that fear as a way of, retaining their market share. So it's kind of a bit like guerrilla tactics in the marketing kind of arena. And we need to be kind of wise to that. But China's a big place. And if you're going to grow mushrooms, in one of the really polluted cities, in a field, like in the middle of downtown, it's probably a bad idea. If you're going to grow them beside a busy highway, where there's all of that pollution, it's probably a bad idea. And, to Kimberly's point about herbs, there is a bit of a double standard there. And, I had a 30-year career in herbal medicine, in manufacturing, and I did it all. I built a production factory. I built spray drying equipment. We were bringing, container loads of herbs in from China, and it's risky business. You can open up a container of herb and it's all moldy, and you can't use it. So Real Mushrooms' parent company is Namex, and they've had a long association with growing mushrooms in China that goes back to the late 80s, the early 90s. And not all China is polluted. And there's enormous tracts of land bigger than the US that are still really pristine. And all of the mushrooms are grown in these kind of wilderness or country locations far from any potential pollution. And in many cases, so the shiitake and the reishi, for example, are grown in the same region where the culture comes from. So 1,000 years ago, some really smart practitioners worked out how to cultivate shiitake mushrooms. Cultivating mushrooms is commercializing them, cultivating them is a really tricky thing to do. You've got to understand the biology of the mushroom, how it grows, what temperatures it likes, et cetera, et cetera. The bolete or the porcini mushroom that we just talked about, it's only recently been worked out how to grow it in a commercial way. Previously, it always had to be wildcrafted. So 1,000 years before modern scientists, worked out how to do it with boletes, they worked out how to do it with shiitake. And it was called the soak and strike technique, where they'd soak logs and then they'd belt them vigorously with really big sticks. And Namex grow the mushrooms in that same area where that technique was first developed. So these mushrooms are being grown in their ancestral homelands. They're being grown under conditions which are entirely natural. So the reishi, for example, is grown under shade cloth. So in these wilderness areas, without any electricity, with natural flowing water, with sunlight, with ambient temperatures, reishi need to be protected from the sun. Their natural habitat is to grow in the forest. If there's too much sun or too much wind, it can be bad for them. So shade cloth is used to mimic, the conditions that are naturally occurring. So Namex was the first organisation to implement organic standards for mushroom growing in China, and they've been instrumental in the development of that. And we're talking large volumes of mushrooms. It's easy to grow a couple of kilos of mushrooms, but last year it was 30,000 tons of fresh turkey tail. That's a lot of turkey tail. So you've got to work really hard, and you've got to be really tight with your producers to make sure that you can keep up with demand, and that the demand is met with products that meet the quality. So growing them in China gives access to all of that knowledge and all of that ancestral, kind of wisdom. And I don't know the personnel involved, but these people have grown up on that land, and they're really steeped in that culture. So reishi needs to grow on a log, because reishi needs wood as the raw material to make the bitter triterpene molecules that are key drivers of reishi's effectiveness. So sometimes it's a log that is the byproduct of the logging industry. So the logging industry only wants, the long, straight kind of trunks of trees so they can make wood products out of them. So all the branches and uneven shapes and things all get wasted. So that gets collected, and that can be used. And then the sawdust from that wood industry, which is broadleaf trees like maple trees and birch trees, for example, that pure sawdust previously would be a waste, and it would have just been composted or thrown away. So the mushroom industry can now take that and use it to make a kind of an artificial log in that sense. You can just compress the sawdust together, and then that can be used. And the benefit of that is that you've got a uniform shape, you've got a light weight, so that people don't get repetitive strain injuries or back injuries by moving big logs around. And shiitake grows on those kind of manufactured logs. And shiitake needs the wood to produce the appropriate chemistry that's going on. If you grow these mushrooms on brown rice, you don't get the same chemistry. The only mushroom that you can grow on brown rice that still provides the same chemistry is cordyceps. So, the brown rice substrates don't create the same chemistry. You don't get the same therapeutic benefit. So the idea that China is somehow dirty and polluted, that, there's unfair trade practices, Namex and Real Mushrooms comply with fair trade. So there's at least 10 different standards, within that fair trade concept, where you can't rip people off. You've got to pay them appropriate wages. You can't use child labour, all that sort of stuff. Everything about the process that Real Mushrooms and Namex employ is world class in terms of the ethics and the sustainability. So it just mystifies me why these kind of rumours and campaigns and really gossip gets promulgated in the retail world. And we should just be having these honest debates about the quality of the products, and the same can be said about liquids and powders. At the end of the day, it's how clean is the product, how ethically produced is it, how honest is it in terms of the chemistry, which can be linked up to pharmacological actions and clinical trials, and how good are the results that you get, therefore, when you give these, products, to our animals and to us as well. It's ergothioneine. It's, one for you and one for your dog. It's not just your dog only. You've got to look after your health as well. Does that help to put some perspective on it?
Yes, it does. So you brought it up, but tinctures and powders, that's what we see. In fact, I have a powder right here. I brought out my ergo bottle.
Yeah.
I take it daily. But, I've always looked at it when people ask me what they should do. Should they do a tincture or a powder? And I always go by, what works best for you. My issue personally with tinctures, and this isn't across the board, but like, for instance, locally, we have a lot of small business owners who are selling tinctures at the local farmers market, and they use an alcohol extraction. And so it just doesn't taste good. And I know for a fact that my dogs are going to be like, I don't want my dogs running from me every time I pull something down for them. And I don't want to turn them off of their food by trying to hide it in their food. So I prefer a powder because I can just quickly mix it into their food. For me, I can either put it into a smoothie or take a capsule, and it works best for me. But is there one preferred over another, or are they equal? Or, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, well, you're sitting in my clinic, doing this interview, and you can see behind me, you can see one row of the liquid bottles that I've got. There's 4 rows. So every patient that I see gets a liquid preparation, and every patient I see gets either tablets or capsules or powders. So I combine them both. So technically, a liquid can be as good as a powder, and a powder as a concentrated or a 1-in-1 extract can be as good as a liquid. So the devil kind of is in the detail. So it comes down to the quality, the dosage, and the compliance, and then the personal preference of the pet parent. So when you make a liquid extract, it's always going to be weaker than the starting material. So let's just use reishi. So, a lot of the products I see with reishi, their ratios, their concentration ratios are 1-in-4, for example. So if you have a reishi mushroom, if you have 1 part mushroom, so it could be a pound or a kilogram, so 1 part mushroom, when you do a liquid extract, you end up with more. So you end up with 2 parts of liquid. So if you extract the reishi, and maybe coffee is a good example for people. We all make coffee, most of us, or we make tea. So the dried tea or the dried coffee has water poured on it, and that water is much greater than the amount of coffee that you use.
Yeah,
so
that makes sense.
When you get an espresso, if you get a really short espresso, the coffee amount might equal the liquid amount. So, the coffee is really strong. But if you have a full cup of coffee with water in it, then it's weaker and it's more easy to drink. So it's the same when you make these mushroom extracts. So most of the extracts on the market are weaker than the starting mushroom. And it's very easy for a company to make a liquid. It's very hard for a company to make a powder. So typically they need to buy that powder from a company like Namex and then, put that in their product. But a lot of people will set up and just make their own liquid extracts, and then they can kind of value add. But almost always a liquid's going to be less strong than a pure concentrated mushroom powder. So I did an experiment recently, and I made a 1-in-2. So 1 part turkey tail made 2 parts turkey tail tincture. And I used pure turkey tail extract, and I dissolved it in there, and it was thick and black looking, and it had a consistency like molasses. So many of the products that you see that are liquids are very thin in terms of their viscosity, and they have very mild tastes. and they're translucent, when a good one would be opaque. So to get a good liquid extract or a tincture, many of these mushrooms need to be dual extracted. So you need to do a water extraction and then you need to do an ethanol extraction. Many of these products are just ethanol extracted. And if you only ethanol extract, you don't get all the beta-glucans out. So those pure ethanol products are going to be low in beta-glucans. And I have seen some scary numbers on labels. So if we use reishi as an example, there's soluble beta-glucans that come out, and then there's insoluble ones that get retained in the mushroom. So when you do a liquid extract of reishi, there's only about 0.5% of beta-glucans that are soluble in the mushroom. So if you have a liquid extract that's of just normal strength, then the maximum amount of beta-glucan that you could get in the finished product would be 2 or 3 or 4% beta-glucan. I've seen products that are liquid extracts that are half glycerin and half mushroom that claim 40 or 50%. And they've got that same characteristic. The glycerol makes them a bit thick, but, they're still translucent and they don't have, strong tastes. There's not a method to test beta-glucans in a liquid, so companies that do that can kind of hide behind the technicalities of it. But it's just technically not possible to take the mushroom when it's got such low dissolvable beta-glucans and put them into that liquid. So I think on the balance, there's probably a greater number of good quality dried mushroom extract products in the market compared to the number of good quality liquid extracts in the market. And I'm in Australia, so it's not a fair comparison, but the companies that are making professional products in Australia don't do it well either. And I don't use them because they don't boil the products. They don't boil a mushroom. It's just a cold percolation. And all of the mushrooms that I use in my clinic are all either capsules, tablets, or dried powders. So I could probably keep on going on, but if you need me to fill in any gaps, please do. But it's not that a liquid is worse than a powder, or powder's worse than a liquid. They can be equally good. It just depends on how they're made. And there's a much greater chance of getting a poor quality liquid than there is a poor quality powder. And then if you're using myceliated grain as the raw material in the liquid, then you've got a whole different category of challenges to face. Does that help?
Yes, very much.
It's a bit of a controversial area, I guess, but I mean, I'm just looking at it as a herbalist, and as a scientist, without necessarily wanting to promote like real mushrooms. And real mushrooms isn't the only mushroom product that I use in my clinic, but I think that they're excellent products, at really affordable prices.
No, that's very helpful. My question is, we touched on, you'd mentioned turkey tail, and there's been a lot of recent research that shows the benefits of turkey tail for dogs with hemangiosarcoma. And then, so I'm actually a breast cancer survivor, and I worked with a naturopathic oncologist in addition to my more conventional treatment. And so one of the many things that I was doing was maitake as part of my treatment as a liquid extract, actually. And so do all mushrooms have benefits for cancer? And what is it in the mushroom, thinking if we share DNA with them, or, do mushrooms get cancer and they make these compounds that fight against it? Or what is the benefit of that to the mushroom, of these cancer fighting compounds?
That is a really good question, Erin. And so going back to that evolutionary story, I told you one half of the equation. The other half of the equation is that because we have this common ancestor, fungi and animals have always been in a battle. So, the animals want to eat the fungi and the fungi want to eat the animals. And the fungi are really good at getting into things and, causing havoc. So the animals developed detectors to detect the presence of a pathogenic fungi so that they could have their immune system heightened and activated to prevent the fungus from gaining entry and causing distress, in the animal. And these detectors, they're receptors, but detector is like a really useful term to use. These have been observed that go back about 400 million years ago. So over the last 400 million years, the evolutionary process has kind of reached a pinnacle in animals, like dogs and horses and cats and humans, to be very, very highly defensive against fungal attack. So whenever we encounter the signature moves, of a fungus, and the outside of a fungus is coated with beta glucans, alpha glucans, a number of other molecules, and those molecules protect the fungus against the environment, and they protect it against attack from the other fungi and bacteria that want to attack the fungus. So in animals and humans, fungal diseases are really quite rare, and it's only immunocompromised animals and humans, or really unwell animals or humans, that get these fungal diseases. Apart from, I don't know if dogs get dandruff, but human dandruff is a fungal disease, and we get toenail fungus and we get jock itch. They're kind of like the obvious ones, and candida is a type of fungus as well. So when we consume a functional mushroom or an edible mushroom, I call them a medicinal mushroom, they've got the same types of chemistry on the outsides of their cell walls that the pathogenic fungi do. But unlike a pathogenic fungi, the medicinal mushroom is not going to become the cordyceps in The Last of Us and start, devouring your body. It just doesn't have that, that capacity to do that. But the beta glucans particularly trigger those detectors that I mentioned earlier. And those detectors, when they get triggered, they think, oh, crikey, there's a fungus here. I need to be better at surveillance because I might be under threat. I might be under attack. I need to recruit the appropriate sort of immune cells to protect me against this type of fungal attack. I need to be more accurate in the way that I deal with my responses. So there's this kind of evolutionary development which has put mushroom beta-glucans and beta-glucans from some plant materials as well into the class of like this conditional nutrient category, where if you consume them on a regular basis, they educate the immune system to be just better at what it does so that you can get less disease. And each mushroom has got its own kind of unique characteristics with regard to the beta-glucan. So if you think of beta-glucans as an alphabet, you can jumble the alphabet up and you can make words out of those letters. And, we can make a lot of words. So it's the same with the beta-glucans. There's individual beta-glucans that are individually expressed within different mushrooms, but within each mushroom, they make up different words. So there's different sentences and there's different paragraphs of information being told to the body by each unique mushroom. So cordyceps has got a unique potential to talk to the immune cells of the lungs, for example, to the immune tissue of the thyroid and to, the health of the kidney, for example. And turkey tail's got its unique characteristics. So when it comes to the question of cancer, then cancer starts off just as a single cell that's gone wrong or a couple of cells that have gone wrong. If we don't have enough ergothioneine, a cell might have too much stress, too much inflammation. The cell says, I'm not coping. I need to kill myself with apoptosis or autophagy. I say autophagy. But if those processes go wrong, you get a cell that becomes necrotic or aberrant, and you can get a cancer cell. So the cleverness of the beta-glucans from each mushroom is that they have the potential to support the immune system to pick up those cancerous cells when they're just in their individual small state. And cancer is technically a verb. We're all doing it all the time. And we've got natural killer cells and other aspects of our immune system that are designed to cruise around and pick out those things so that they don't ever become a problem. So in the modern world, the rate of that cancering can overwhelm the immune system's capacity to pick them off. And that rate of cancering can be dietary, it can be, all of the toxic elements in the world. It might, the stress that people are under, and genetics plays a big role as well. So mushrooms play a really important role in prevention. And then during, treatment regimes, mushrooms aren't proven to be effective on their own to treat the cancer. They work really well in concert with conventional treatments. They make those treatments work better, and they make the patient, you or me or the dog, more resistant to the rigors of the medicine, whether it's radiation or chemotherapy, so that they can be more robust and healthy. And that allows the body to respond better to the actual, process. And so each mushroom's got its uniqueness, and turkey tail, is great for breast cancer. But if you have gastric cancer, there's best evidence for shiitake, for example. So when you get into the weeds of that, there's nuances around how you would use the different mushrooms, and a combination of them is probably a good idea. But turkey tail stands out as like the key one, because there's turkey tail and shiitake, because there's just so much research, backing those unique kind of beta glucans as the therapeutic agents. So hopefully I could translate that kind of complex, message into a way that makes it understandable.
Absolutely. I appreciate it.
So I read something that mushrooms can actually talk to each other or communicate with each other in some way.
Yeah, I'm not a mycologist, but yeah, I believe that to be true. The movie Fantastic Fungi promulgated this idea that fungi talk to plants, and researchers picked up on that. I think, their children were at school, and the children came home and said, "Oh, Mum or Dad, we've watched this fantastic movie at school today, and fungi can talk to trees." And the scientist parents are like, "What? I don't know about that. I'm going to go and look at that." So research has been done, and that kind of pushed the envelope. It was just a hypothesis, and it isn't actually as accurately portrayed in that movie. But I think without fungi, we wouldn't have any plants. There's a definite mycorrhizal, so fungi and root kind of interaction in the soil, where fungi provide nutrients to plants and trees that they can't develop themselves, and the fungi gets nutrients from the trees that they can't produce themselves. So there's this kind of symbiotic relationship that goes on.
It's all fascinating to me.
Yeah, it is. It's fascinating to me as well.
So this is probably a silly question, but we're wrapping up, right? So
No silly question.
So I want to incorporate more mushrooms in my diet because I understand that it's beneficial to eat them, but I still have like trauma from my mom's bad cooking as a kid and me picking them out. Is there a good mushroom to start with the eating for somebody who wants to be incorporating it more in their diet for health reasons? That's like mild.
Yeah. So as a kid, were you picking out just like the white button mushrooms?
Probably, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think white button mushrooms are a good place to start because of their mild flavor. People have got challenges with mushrooms from the taste perspective, but also the texture. A lot of people don't like the texture. So if it's the taste, then blend it into a food. So, put the mushrooms into a stew, and then, the mushroom takes on the flavor of the stew or the soup, for example. If it's the texture, you can just grind them up so that you don't even know there's mushrooms in there. So if it's the texture, you're not worried about the taste. So, you could blend the mushrooms in some bone broth and have a really quick kind of, mushroom soup. But shiitake's got a flavor which, if you've got childhood trauma around eating mushrooms, then maybe go for a different one. And oyster mushrooms have got a very kind of mild flavor, and they're really nice just sauteed, with a bit of garlic and onion maybe. Or
I saute them with garlic and bok choy.
Oh
So
wow, that's a home
or
run for me
zucchini.
right there.
I have a vegetable garden, so I just harvest zucchini. So I'm gonna run.
And you
to
could
the
do the
store.
same with shiitake.
Yeah, so good. I'm like I feel like I'm the weird, because I was the weird kid that tried everything. My mom used to take me and make me try all these different things, so I never really developed an ick to food. I loved liver and onions as a kid. I mean, I was that kid. So
Right.
just like I love mushrooms.
Cool. And then if people don't like, if people can't get over that, then you've got the extracts and the products that you can take in a capsule form, so you don't actually know you're taking it. So we've got all the bases covered.
That's what I've been doing. I like the 5 Defenders. It helps with my allergies.
Yeah, and 5 Defenders is a really good place for people to start. It's effective at a low dose. Just a couple of capsules a day gives you, like a really meaningful quantity of those functional mushrooms.
I bought a bottle for my mom, sent it to
her. Good on you. Yeah, it's never too late.
Oh my gosh, this has been so much fun. Thank you so much for your time.
My pleasure, Erin and Kimberly. It's great. I've had a terrific time. Hope I haven't been too verbose for you and given you too long answers.
No, it's perfect, because our audience we want to know all the details. We want to know how this works,
Cool. Well, if you got any questions, just let me know.
We will.
Thank you.
My pleasure.